Thank you so much, Bo, and thank you all for attending, and thanks for the organization for giving me the opportunity to be here with a great panel today. I was listening to some of the conversations before, and I found myself in a roller coaster, to be honest. I happen to be a fan of roller coasters, maybe good to know for a next poem. What I like about it is, on the one hand, you know that something very exciting is going to happen, and you're not exactly sure what, if it's the first time you take one. On the other hand, you always know there's this kind of boundary of safety around it. It can never go really wrong. It can be kind of, yeah, something that you didn't do. It can go very fast. It can surprise you. But you embrace it because it's new, it's exciting. It will bring you something, the thrill. So that's a little bit how I see AI, actually. It's like a roller coaster. Let's embrace it. Let's also make sure it's safe, so that we do not get lost in the track somewhere. Understand that it will be something new, that new roller coasters come up. This will not be the last one for sure. And let's take a look at multiple perspectives. You can look at the roller coaster when you sit there waiting for somebody who is brave enough to be the first one to be in it. But you can also be in the roller coaster, in the middle, a little bit safe, you don't feel it so much, or in the front or in the back when you really feel it all. So it's up to us to choose where are we going to be in that roller coaster. And everybody of us chooses their own seat or spectator position. And that's what actually the panelists have done. And in this panel we have, I think, the brave ones among the ones who joined the roller coaster. We have two entrepreneurs, Julian and Manoj, who actually handled AI from day one, avant la lettre, I would say. Because they were really the early ones, founding companies when nobody really spoke about it yet, or had adopted AI, and when it was definitely not the conversation of the birthday parties of today. So welcome to the two of you as entrepreneurs on this panel. And then we also take a different perspective. Thibaut is associate professor in Amsterdam, studying a lot of the dynamics around foundational models, competition law, and really going one level deeper and positioning all this dialogue in the context of what is happening in society, maybe today and much longer term. So we will hear about his perspectives as well. And then Malin has joined the panel, thank you for that, to share more about what she's doing in her PhD, studying also AI and competition law, platforms, but also looking at how new generations experience all this. Because also when looking around in this roller coaster, I saw a lot of people who take the ride, actually, when many at our age wouldn't do that anymore. So thank you for that. But I also sometimes feel that we need to listen to the ones who built the roller coasters, the young people who actually find it exciting to define new roller coasters. So thank you for joining the panel and to discuss more on that.
Thank you.
In preparation, we thought, yeah, what will we actually look at today? To make sure that you hear something new, hopefully, we will take a look at the entrepreneurial perspective of AI and what companies can actually do to change the world there, to augment humans. And for that, actually, Julian and Manoj will give short introductions, and then we will have some conversation around that. After that, we will move to the topic of foundation models, their dynamics, and competition law. So bear with us. This will be a little bit kind of deep, I think. And then we will look at how can we embrace the AI opportunity in a data-driven and media-driven world of today's generation, where Malin will tell us all about. So I hope you'll enjoy the next hour, the roller coaster ride, and for long after that. So let me now give the floor to Julian to share a bit more about how he has experienced AI in his company and how you came actually to use AI in such a magnificent way for innovation.
Great, thank you very much, Maaike. So I guess the reason I set the company up, it is to try to use AI to overcome many of the kind of barriers that I perceived to invention, to make invention more accessible, make it a more accessible skill, and also to make it a more efficient activity. Because if you think about the way inventions traditionally come about, it's really normally due to an interaction between information and people. So the information that triggers an invention, and then the people that are responsible for creating those inventions. And certainly in the past, that interaction has been rather haphazard and rather serendipitous. Because, for example, people make inventions when they meet someone for a coffee, and they learn something new, they put two and two together in their head, and they come up with a great idea. But who's to say they couldn't have met someone a week earlier, a month earlier, or a year earlier, and come up with that great idea at an earlier moment in time? Or who's to say they couldn't have met someone different, learned something even more useful, and therefore come up with an even more valuable invention? So I think in the past, invention creation has been rather haphazard and rather serendipitous, because it's relied on this chance interaction between the information that triggers an invention and the people that create those inventions. And so what we do today is to use AI to amplify the human ability to invent. So not to replace it, but to augment and enhance the human ability to invent. And we do that in a number of different ways, but maybe I can use an analogy to explain how AI can augment the human ability to invent. So if you think of inventing a bit like cooking, then as a chef, your ability to come up with new dishes is constrained by your access to ingredients. Now, if you have access to ingredients that other chefs are very unlikely to have access to, maybe because those ingredients are very new, or because they're very distant from your field of expertise, but maybe converging towards it. Because you have access to different ingredients, you can come up with different dishes, or i.e., you can come up with different inventions. And so because invention creation is really the result of the information that inventors have access to, by using AI to deliver the right information at the right time, or the right ingredients at the right time, it's possible to enable people to invent in a much more optimal way, a way that's much more efficient, much more timely, and above all, also much more accessible to maybe people who otherwise wouldn't have had the opportunity to invent.
Well, thank you for that introduction. We talked about accessibility of invention making. Is it indeed that AI, in your view, kind of increases the accessibility of invention making? Or is that not a fair conclusion to draw?
No, I think it is a fair conclusion, because I think invention creation today is quite an unusual skill in that it's practiced efficiently by very, very few people, even in big organizations. And there are a number of different reasons for that. Not least, people have to be familiar with what a good invention looks like. And so therefore they need to be able to differentiate good inventions from bad inventions. And of course, not only can AI be used to deliver the right ingredients at the right time, hence making the act of invention more easy to access, but it can also be used to help differentiate good inventions from bad inventions and hence provide this feedback loop, hence making it a lot easier for people to really produce the inventions that are valuable in a time-optimal way.
Well, thank you for that. And that creates a nice bridge, I think, to what Manoj is actually doing, because what you mentioned is that we can increase speed of invention making. I think, Manoj, with your company, you try to also be very efficient and effective, creating insights, supporting people to increase the speed of patenting, make the patent portfolio more effective. Can you share a bit more about your views there?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Thanks, Maika. Just as a premise where we started, the product vision that we currently executed is not something that we had complete clarity at the time when we started this journey. And I believe that in any experiment with artificial intelligence in relation to building products that can augment the expertise of patent prosecutors or patent admins and paralegals, especially US and Europe, we couldn't think of an alternative to a standard workflow-based docketing system that we often refer to as the system for IP management, right? So what is the alternative for people like us? And I have my colleague Mukundan here. Some of us who have been tech patent prosecutors who practiced in private practice and founded a law firm and raised it. And that experience, how do you translate into a product vision? And I think that is different from the way in Silicon Valley, where we're currently based, would have AI scientists or software developers who would come together from a Stanford Berkeley ecosystem to found a company and then build a tech stack, and then you apply that tech stack to a domain like patents. So we're coming from the other way around. But what we have realized is that the advancement of patent data, especially the global dossier, the US Patent Office's patent system, most recently the PETS data, Patent Examination Data System, Patent Center, eSpaceNet, all converged into a possibility that we could build libraries using languages like Python and create AI-trained data libraries that can output or that can power point solutions for, say, a variety of use cases through patent prosecution life cycle, starting invention disclosure review to possibly writing an application. There are tools coming up, but certainly for office action responses, automating in the United States, we have something called an IDS form, eventually to possibly build claim charts and certain invalidation searches and analysis. So can you place these point solutions through patent prosecution life cycle and aid patent portfolio developers to make the process more efficient? 40%, 30%, on a scale of 16 million patents valid in force existing, on at any point of time, roughly 1.8 to 3 million US patent applications pending. That's a huge impact. Yeah.
That definitely sounds like impact. So are you then expecting that in future we will actually see a reduction in the total amount of patents, or at least the ones that will be valid?
That is a good question, and thank you for asking. But from a standpoint of helping corporates to decide what to keep, what to abandon, I believe AI can generate very valuable insights on the economic potential of a large number of patents in force. So yes.
So be ready. The number of patents will go down, which we haven't seen before, I think.
But I
That's
believe the
an
quality will
interesting
come up as well, because given prior art analysis would become more and more accurate, the quality would increase and the quantity might come down.
And that starts already at the beginning with the invention-making process, Julian?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because inventions in a way are intrinsically built on scientific discoveries or pre-existing inventions. So in a sense, the more inventions that exist, the more inventive permutations that you have. So of course, that would indicate the number of patents will continue to rise. But yeah, I think it's also true if people can distinguish those inventions that are most likely to have value, then they can maybe be more, maybe have more insight in which inventions they choose to file on.
I see Malin nodding. Is this something that you also experience in your research?
So I draw connections to more of the kind of ecosystem perspective and where information meets, as you were talking about, like where the innovation is created. And I think maybe that we're seeing, and I'm going to talk about that a bit later on, that maybe we are seeing a more fragmented IP strategy, or like a blend of proprietary and open innovation, and then that would affect the numbers of patents being applied for.
That's very interesting that we see a blend of proprietary and open innovation. Thank you for raising that. Thibaut, do you see that happening as well, that there will be a blend, and how do you see that being influencing the competitive environment then?
Sure. Maybe right before I answer your question, I have to say I'm very excited to be here for two reasons. The first is that you mentioned roller coasters. And for the last 20 years of his professional life, my dad actually created and ran an amusement park. So that brings back a lot of child memories. I'm also excited because I think I'm going to be deceptive on this panel. You may expect an academic to be kind of the skeptic in the room. And I think I'm probably the least skeptic when it comes to AI. I try to be a rational optimist, so I'm going to try to answer your question in this way and not, be an evangelist. But to your question, so there is a possibility, and I'm discussing with a lot of academics, people at the MIT maybe pushing for open source for reasons. Some other people in other universities may be more in favor of a closed system. Of course, it's hard. Prediction is hard, especially when it's about the future. You may have heard that. What I think is that we have to bend, and this is what I love to do in the teaching, not only the law, computer science, but also economics, to kind of get a sense of what might be the answer to your question. To keep it short, if you go, and the word complexity was mentioned, which is a third reason why I'm excited to be here. If you go to one of the key concepts, which is the one of the feedback loops, I think this might be a central concept of why open source or closed system may evolve and survive over time. I'm more than happy later on to talk about the distinction we can make between different types of foundation models. But overall, the ability to learn from usage and to keep on improving the system, combined with the ability to push the system to 3 billion users in a second, as opposed to having to build a user base, I think will define whether or not open source will make it or not. So it seems that there is a good shot for open source right now, but I wouldn't be of the opinion that open source is about to take over every proprietary solutions and that it's already done for open source.
So the mixture will be there, as Maden is saying then.
I mean, again, I guess so. I think I see room for both to coexist. But if you look at I have in mind Yann Lequin, and we had people from Meta today, is trying to push the message for open source for lots of different reasons. And on the other end, I see all the people such as OpenAI, which, as you will know, is now not promoting open source, although this was the original idea. And they may sometimes give the impression that one will completely take over the other one, which is something that I saw in my research when it comes to blockchain. We've heard Web3 is going to kill Web2. There is no more tech giants, or the opposite. Tech giants will kill blockchain. This is just a fading path. And I think that actually both are here to coexist because the value proposition is so different. Same for open source and closed system. But I might be wrong. We'll see. Maybe we'll take the video of this conference and you can put that on Twitter. Bo would do that, I'm sure, if I'm wrong.
In 20 years, we meet again, and then we will see. What this sparked with me is also, you say open source and sharing. We also see that open innovation, and especially AI, could generate a lot of new materials, a lot of new publications, making the density of prior art so huge that it will be difficult to create the next invention. How do you deal with that, Julian, with this opportunity to generate a lot of prior art, to put it all out and say, well, now nothing is patentable anymore?
Yeah, I think that's true. So I think, certainly our focus is on augmenting and enhancing the human ability to invent. So that means the marginal cost of invention is still significant. However, of course, as we've seen with ChatGPT and other technologies, it is possible to automate some of the way good ideas, or ideas at least, I'm not saying they're good coming out of ChatGPT, but how ideas are generated. And if you have a almost zero marginal cost of generating these ideas, then of course you can potentially publish those in huge volume. So yeah, I think it will create an interesting dynamic between maybe those companies who want to pursue a publishing strategy and those other companies who maybe want to pursue more patent-centric strategies.
Thank you. I think that is an interesting thing to see how that will develop, because I'm sure that Manoj and his company will also see that this might kind of raise the bar for inventiveness a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there has to be a clear distinction in our kind of perspective between extractive AI and generative AI. To meet the accuracy requirement in relation to figuring out the textual matter in multiple prior art references in the context of determining in layman's language here in terms of novelty, inventive step, determination to respond to an office action that rejects a set of claims on those grounds in the US, for example, you need to be accurate. And there's a premium for accuracy in law, as you know. So generative AI actually sometimes is counterproductive. You saw that New York lawyer putting some pieces of paper and then becoming a national news in CNN. So as opposed to that, our current process has been to look at, to actually do the hard work of curating data in specific to technology classes and specific to certain fixed parameters and to make it responsive to pre-faced questions, if we can, and then render it to specific to use cases, and so kind of a data lake microservice platform perspective. Now, can you bolt GPT-4 on top of it for a wider application? Is something that we are beginning to explore. But at this point, premium to extractive AI versus generative AI is where we are. I'm keen to know your and Professor's response to this at some point.
Well, that's an invitation, I think, for the others to react to. Do you have a view on that, Thibault?
I mean, somehow related to that, and I hope this will be a beginning of an answer. In my own daily use of AI, I can use a service to give a claim and say, give me the state of the literature on that claim and all the sources to back the claim, because editors want me to do that. So I may generate, 20 articles, put that as a footnote, and maybe, I won't even read those papers. On the other end, I can also give the link to a YouTube video and say, well, this is a 30-minute video. I don't really have the time. Just give me a summary of the video. So I'm wondering if we won't end up in a situation where actually people won't read the papers. They will just use generative AI to summarize the paper and read that. And I'm wondering if the same could be true somehow for patents, right? Are we about to enter a world in which nobody is actually reading, all the description of the patent? Generative AI will do that, will sum up, what the patent is all about to know whether or not that system can actually be called a new one. And I mean, it seems it's so meta, it's so hard to conceive, but yeah, it's not that I fear that it may be happening, but this is a possibility, for sure.
But I think making patents more accessible is a huge opportunity, because patents are not the most readable documents.
Yeah.
So I think anything that can really make those more accessible by people has got to be a good thing.
But on the other end, if you could use AI to, put more technicality there, to some degree, the actual patent will be itself, the document, will be less readable, but then you're going to be able to use technology to better understand technology, which I think is often something we fail to see. We tend to see that technology could simplify when it's a great technology or complexify things, but tech may also help better understand it. So then in the end, yes, you go back to the same idea of simplifying or making it more accessible, but only if you use AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. May I say something?
Of course, and then Malin, I think, would like to add.
I might be oversimplifying with a very learned audience here on patents, but at the cost of oversimplifying, if I may say this, that the truth of invention has a certain scope, and the attorney's craft has a certain scope, which is greater than the truth of invention, and the trial judge has to push it back to truth of invention. So it is the dynamics between the invention disclosure's actual inventive concept and the feature and the contours of an invention with the craft, which is a play of legal craft. Law is language, Lois language, so it's a language play, and then you put this through a trial process using multiple aspects of patent law to put it back to the truth. If it is so, AI can expose that smoke in principle, but I think over time, if we use a combination of extractive generative AIs and AI models as OpenAI enhances these possibilities and data gets more curated and we have less burden on OCR and more data quality in the first place, then the extraction becomes more accurate, output gets accurate, and there is a possibility that in the next 10 years we can go in the direction, which means that quality high, quantity low, which is the original purpose of patent as a system, I believe.
So that would be a real impact then, huh? Quality high, quantity low, and we're back in balance, because we heard that the system is out of balance according to some of the previous speakers. What I hear you saying on the one hand is it will actually enable us, AI, to create more complex patent applications, but it will also summarize more easily. What's your view, Malin, there? Is this something that will appeal also to people who are very used to kind of using AI and ChatGPT because they are growing up with it as a tool and not seeing it as a novelty like maybe I would do?
That's a tricky question. I think people are definitely using AI for simplification of complex matters, for sure. And then I think maybe like your point is valid too. But then maybe I think it could be about my generation, but it could also be about the intention of the market actors. Like, where do you want to draw the line? Do you want to push the innovation in that direction, or do you not? So that could be one interesting point to that. But then also, I think the digital literacy among like younger people is definitely increasing. And I think these issues will be important to address going further in the like AI innovation journey as well.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point there, that new generations are so much more familiar, at least the ones who have access to all these tools, that the world might look different in 20 years than what we would anticipate it to be today. Thank you for giving your view on that very interesting first topic that we had on augmentation of humans by AI. And we will come back to this in the third topic a little bit again. Let's move now to the foundation models, of which you kindly offered to explain a bit more, Thibaut. Can you share a bit on your work there and what you see as general developments?
Sure. So I'm going to try my best to make it understandable, knowing that it is almost 4 p.m. And if you want more, a QR code may appear in the form of a forest because we are in Sweden, but it should work. This is my take on the subject. I think you have to make a distinction between different layers, different stacks, regardless of how you want to call it. The first one I will call the AI infrastructures. This may be cloud, compute, companies like Qualcomm, NVIDIA, and others, right? AWS. On top of that, you may build the foundation models. This is a term that has been coined by Stanford professors, and this is what underlies, so this is layer 2, this is what underlies the application, right? So if you talk about ChatGPT, you are talking about one application of that foundation model. If you talk about Google Bard, this is also one application, so the third layer, on top of which, that will be the final one, you have the users, right? And you see that all of those layers, of course, they interact with one another. This was reported, I don't have the exact number in mind, but that I think it was reported that ChatGPT last year, OpenAI, so the company behind ChatGPT, spent $440 million USD just to train ChatGPT, right? But now the costs are going down. So the cost of using the infrastructures are going down, which means that it's easier to develop those foundation models and maybe easier to then have good application, good users. And if you have many users, it's easier to attract the venture capitalists, and therefore, you go back and forth. Now, if you look just at the foundation models, this is where we have all the talk about open source. There are some applications that you may use for free, but quickly realize that you really have to pay a price to use. But the open source at the second layer, the foundation model, this is where you see a big battle as I speak. On the one hand, you have companies such as Meta or repositories such as Hugging Face with a dashboard listing all of the open source you may use so that you can develop an app, right? And of course, you have all the different licenses you may imagine. On the other end, you have all the companies not open source at all, such as OpenAI, such as Microsoft, Google, who are pushing for their own solution to be adopted. Now, to go back to your question, whether or not open source has a chance to survive and or to take over the non-open source foundation models, I think, and I will finish there, this depends on the type and the purpose of the foundation model. So far, most of what we see is what I will call general public foundation model or general use, general purpose, right? OpenAI, Bo can use that to write beautiful poem, or maybe he actually wrote those poems, but can't admit that. I can use that to generate a recipe and so on and so forth. And everybody has access to OpenAI, to ChatGPT. I think what we see appearing, and it's clear if you look at Crunchbase and where the venture capitalists are putting money on the table, is what I would call the ecosystem foundation models. Those are the foundation models used by the industry where the companies are putting the data, but only those companies can use those foundation models. You have lots of interesting issues in terms of IP, business secret, competition, is it a collusion, and so on and so forth. What's coming, and I will put money on the table that it is coming, although this is the early beginning, is what I would call the personal foundation model. Why? Because just in the United States, the ecosystem around giving personal advice to people generates something like 40 billion USD a year. So I see no reason why in 5 to 10 years we wouldn't have those solutions telling you, you give me all of your personal data and I will generate what might be the best decision for you as an individual. To go back to my idea of the feedback loop, for the general purpose, I think the more users, the better they become. And it's very important that you can access some unique data sets. When it comes to ecosystem foundation models, you see less of a feedback loop because if you have good industry players within your ecosystem foundation model, this might be good enough for you to survive. And for the personal one, it seems that there is no big feedback loop, right? I mean, if we train a foundation model based on your data to inform my life, this is not really helpful. So there I see that it might be easier for a small company, maybe an open source company, to survive because the costs are probably lower, as opposed to when you talk about general purpose foundation model where big companies will push that immediately to 3 billion users and start generate data. And those are very costly to still develop and run. So I hope that that answers your question or that it is the beginning of an answer. Well, but again, have a look at the QR code. And of course, if you have any question, I'm always happy to engage.
It definitely answers some of the questions, but of course, like usual, it will raise a few as well. Yep. When I hear you about these ecosystems, foundational models, I kind of think back on one of the previous sessions where there was a concern about making IP available through government decisions in certain domains. Do you expect this will happen to foundational models in the end and the data behind it, that governments will say, for public sake, it has to become available?
So you mean to force private information to become public for the purpose?
Yeah, or with a certain boundary conditions of course, the data privacy laws, etc. But yep. Having the big data lakes and sitting on those data lakes as a company might at some point be considered the pharma of the future.
Yeah, so I see two separate issues maybe. The first is what you are referring to, and to everyone in the room who've been following the negotiation for the Data Act. I know there are so many acts, we get confused, but it's still ongoing, and that's now what's being changed, on an almost weekly basis, where it's on the one hand business secret, on the other hand, well, we need that information to be shared, otherwise no interoperability, no need for the Data Act. I see no reason why we wouldn't have the same question for foundation models. And I'm not sure what we would do in Europe, but it would be surprising that amongst all the countries in the world, there is not a single country that would say you have to put the data public. Maybe the second one, which is a slightly different question related to IP, is whether or not you could train your foundation model based on the data that is already public, right? Or already publicly accessible, whether or not it is in the end of a publisher. Japan, with a declaration from one of his minister, actually said, well, it's okay, go ahead. Every company can now train foundation model based on the New York Times or any outfit that you see fit. I'm not sure what will end up in Europe, but coming from the perspective of competition law, and I'm just mentioning that to IP experts because I think this will be put in a balance. If you say you cannot train the foundation model without paying to get access to that, so you have to have the royalties. What you end up doing, of course, is that you give some sort of preference to the companies that can afford that. So you slow down competition for the small companies. Maybe this is necessary because balance with IP, but it's funny to see that we always come back to the same conflicting relationship between IP and competition. And this one is here as I speak already.
Yeah, thank you for phrasing that so clearly. Manoj, I see you nodding a few times. Would you like to add something to this?
I was absorbing what he said and reflecting on it from a Silicon Valley venture-funded company perspective. So the standard venture funding, venture funds flow into B2B SaaS or B2C SaaS, and the standard format, as you know. But at least a couple of companies in the portfolio of our primary investors have data as investment thesis, and primarily from Stanford. Mostly, we are part of Stanford ecosystem. The reason I was I was reflecting on your conversation is that one of the challenges that we face is that take any use case, like responding to an office action, right? Now you have statutory law, 35 US code, you have procedural law, 37 CFR, you have manual of patent examining procedure, you have case law, you have certain templates and certain stylizations of patent lawyers, certain craft, which is different from a 2-year associate to somebody who's 20 years in patent prosecution practice. So all of that requires significant amount of feedback back into the loop to come back to train NLP systems to output more accuracy. Now, if isolated efforts by VC, venture, even private equity, large capital funded companies cannot cover that across 42,000 registered US patent attorneys, who probably at least 35,000 of them in active practice, coast to coast and mid in the US. So the challenge is that craft to come back into the feedback loop to train the system to increase the accuracy to a point where it becomes sort of acceptable. So I was just thinking a comparable situation could be that we have a semi-open source system where more collaboration comes in the industry, and that happens, which in turn helps examiners and attorneys and corporates and law firms to become sort of users of a kind of a platform rather than isolated tools. So that was what I was sort of reflecting back, taking cues from, ideas from what you said in our context.
Thank you for that. And Julian, what does it mean for you when you hear about these models and access to the data? Because obviously you use a lot of data as well. Are you kind of cautious there on what kind of usage you do? Or would you open up your kind of data sources to everybody?
That's a good question. So I guess we use a number of different types of data. And of course, we use content, but we also have our own proprietary training data as well. And this is very valuable to us because it's our proprietary information. And in a sense, no matter how good the AI, it's only as good as the training data that you have. So training data is the fuel for AI. And so this is a very core part of our intellectual property, actually. And this training data has been generated through the creation of many thousands of inventions. And it really is at the very heart of what we do. So I think from our point of view, if we were to share that, then we would potentially give away a big part of our competitive advantage. So for us, the training data just as much as the content. The content, of course, is also important, but the training data is really at the very heart of the company.
I can understand it. Can I phrase it differently? That you would say it's at the heart of your company, but also that it depends on what you get in return, whether you would want to make it available, because it's in the end all about value.
That's true. Yeah, that's exactly true.
So that would open up potentially a dialogue around access, I assume.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I mean, today we make it available in the form of our product, but of course it could also be made available in other ways as well.
That sounds very promising, thank you. And with that, I would like to move to the third topic about embracing the AI opportunity. I think you hear from this panel that we are extremely optimistic. We are cautious, but also optimistic around the role of AI in a data and media-driven world of today and of the next generation. Can I ask you to give a bit your reflection on that, Malin?
Yeah, I'm going to give so I have a background in law as well and a technology management perspective. So I'm going to try to combine the two of them and to touch upon some of the things that we have discussed during the panel as well. So one intensely debated issue is whether and how AI should be regulated. And there is a current divide between the precautionary and the pre-actionary approaches, where the one stresses the need for regulation before any further developments, whereas the other one points out that regulation implemented too early might be misguided, hamper important innovation and beneficial solutions. So I think that one of the key issues here that we have been touched upon both during this panel and in the first one or the one before us is the high level of uncertainty, that we not really know what we are regulating. And I think that many of the issues that we are talking about is touching upon that. And I think it's important to have in the back of your minds. There's also this ongoing conversation concerned with the asymmetry of tools that you talked about. The access of training data is just one of them, along with the technology available for training the data or interpreting the data. And I think that this digital divide is not only corporate, but also somewhat international. And I think that, as we have also been discussing quite a bit during this event, that open innovation and ecosystem dynamics, platformization, are keys in providing the maximum societal benefit for sustainable AI development. So, as intellectual property rights can be viewed as enablers for open innovation, or like a currency for collaboration, if you will. Many market actors are actually starting to adopt open strategies, as Thibaut was talking about earlier, around data as well. Open source libraries and frameworks for AI have actually laid the foundation for many of the current innovative solutions that we see within the AI development. Many large actors present their AI capabilities in platform formats for third parties to access and build for their own use cases, which I think is very interesting. And I think that these open strategies are successful, but I would also like to see a framework for, or more examples on frameworks for sharing data and to provide this kind of blended strategy between the proprietary approach and the open approach within data, which is much more difficult to protect compared to or it follows a different logic than the regular IPRs does, as you all know. So I'm very interested in what new models we will see within that sphere, and also where do we get our data? Because obviously, we have the data sets that we have built upon, built up internally, but the large language models are basically drawn from data at the internet, which contains personal data, copyrighted material, and whether that material or the copyright holds that will still, it affects companies in the sense that we are seeing large objections, loud objections towards the use of artistic works, for example, without compensation. And if I can be a bit speculative, I think that we need to account for the data generated by users and consumers to another, like in a different way and to a larger extent. And that might be that we might need to involve those actors in a different way to start to approach, like, how do we shift or create a shift in the general opinion about sharing your data, because like, I think today that we are not really, or like my generation is not really cautious about which data we share. But when we start to see the more tangible value, like in what that data can generate through the large language models, I think that we are going to see that in a different way. So we need to approach the kind of maybe work with trust and like comprehensible ways of compensation for a different kind of actor in this field. And I think that maybe decentralized technologies like blockchain and tokenization of data might be one way to do so, to kind of make the data more tangible for both the companies, but also mainly for the consumers or the general public.
I think that's a very interesting perspective on awareness on data sharing, and I know it's been mentioned here before, but I'm sure you see something of that with your students as well, Thibaut, about data sharing. And do you see a development there that people understand and recognize also the data really represents value?
So I had this discussion not so long ago when I was abroad, and it seems that the reaction of our students very much depend on the geography. My students don't care. Period. They use TikTok, they don't care, right? In some other countries, at least the professors with whom I talk, their students will be very concerned about the data. I ask every year, I teach a course on the Google cases, who's not using Google? Never a single student. In some other countries, it seems that there is a trend toward that. And you may find other geography where it's more balanced. But when I ask them who's using ChatGPT, they all laugh because it's such an obvious question that, why even bother answering the question? They all use TikTok, not Instagram, because it's for old people, not even talking about Facebook. So, yeah, to some degree, this, I'm not sure if those privacy rules will come from them. At least again, I'm based in the Netherlands, if that wasn't obvious.
That's interesting. Maybe for a few closing remarks, what do you see there, Julian? Is this the same around, because you work with a lot of very eager young inventors as well?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So we have a lot of employees in the company straight from university, and yeah, I think they're very comfortable using TikTok and other types of social media as well. So yeah, I think they don't have the concerns that maybe people with a few more years have. And I guess one more comment I had actually is around the kind of gestation cycles we see around adoption of technology. So I think if you look back in time at different technologies like VR, augmented reality, fingerprint recognition, blockchain, all of these technologies have quite long gestation times. And I think it's also true with AI. And I think we're just part of the way through the development of AI and the deployment of AI. I think it still has a long way to go yet. And I do think we probably see quite a lot of hype, in particular, around the use of LLMs and GPT in particular.
Yeah, you may kind of 1 minute.
I'll be even shorter. I just realized, you may have realized I didn't want to name countries as to how people react. Just have a look at WorldCoin, if you haven't heard about it. It's a project created by Sam Altman, the person behind OpenAI. And the WorldCoin is a cryptocurrency, and for you to access a cryptocurrency, you need to actually scan your eyeball, right? This will be the way for you to access your wallet. Have a look at the adoption, and this will give you the hint as to which country is more resistant to trading privacy for value. or not.
Well, thank you. We will all eagerly look at that, I'm sure. Manoj, would you like to add a final kind of comment before we give the last word to Malin?
Yeah, thank you. You know, we come from the practice side of AI and the domain side of AI. So from a conceptual plane, the public-private nuances of data that you sort of at the background of your conversation would be different from the concerns that we have. For example, we would say in the patent context, our concerns are non-patent prior art literature. Our concerns are oriental patent data. Our concerns would be a Chinese patent office issuing an office action with a Chinese university journal article and a corresponding application being prosecuted in Japan. And so how do you capture that or IEEE publications or all of that into the context of OCRable, curatable data that can then textually processed and put through the stack on to render through UI onward to users. So that articulation just I had is a fundamentally different conceptual plane compared to the concepts of public-private notions around data, whether IP, non-IP. But the premise in our case is that, and I recently wrote briefly about it, we come from a fundamental principle called, can I have 30 more seconds? A fundamental
because I would like to leave the word to Malin.
Fundamental premise called public notice function. So if you really remember the statute of monopolies in Britain, inviting Italian, German inventors to actually exhibit or work the inventions in consideration for disclosure of useful information to the British public, for which you issue literary patentes, which is open letters, disallowing others to use those inventions, was the useful information's disclosure to public, which is the basis of patent disclosures. So therefore, using patent disclosures in a more AI curated way for immediate consumption is consistent with the fundamentals of patent law. I hurried through that. Yeah, sorry.
Malin, can I ask you to add a little bit of your kind of final conclusion or kind of what would you like people to take away from this as kind of for next generation?
Well, that's a hard one. I mean, I think that the like another perspective on the public-private division.
4 seconds,
oh, 4 seconds.
Sure.
Thank you. But I think that's interesting also, but depending on which kind of data that you're using. Like, so like I look into the healthcare sector a bit, and that would obviously I will encounter a lot of regulatory issues, right? But then you have the more private sector, which is, or like the social media sector, that it's not really regulated in the same way. So I also think that the opinion of my generation, it would also be affected by which kind of data we are talking about. So yes, we are keen on trying out new technologies, but we are also, I would say, a bit cautious about like which kind of data it is. But that's my my personal view.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for giving your perspective from entrepreneurial kind of AI people of the first moment, university perspective, research, going deep into the foundational models. And thank you, Malin, for giving us such a nice outlook on what you do in your PhD as well.